Welcome, everybody, and everyone that is joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time and most of all, your patience for our presentation tonight. We just want to say thank you for joining us. We're going to be presenting Ubuntu El Retorno, our YouTube channel and podcast, Black August in the Diaspora. As Ubuntu El Retorno joins this month of August in celebrating Black August, we continue with also honoring and remembering those African and African descendants in the Latin America community and the diaspora. Today, we will be learning about a few of them. However, we invite you to continue learning about those who are not mentioned here today because of the time. And we encourage you from wherever you are, country or community, to continue looking and searching for those African Americans or African descendants or Africans that you don't know about and they have a story. So thank you so much. So we're going to be looking at Sebastian Lemba from the Republic, Gaspar Yanga from Mexico, Gregorio Luperon from the Dominican Republic, Maria Remedios del Valle from Argentina, the Zulus in Africa, Mau Mau in Africa, and we're also going to be looking at a special presentation that I'm going to be sharing with you, Lesbia and Belén del Villar Robles from the Dominican Republic. And the reason why you see more people here from the country that it's called today, the Dominican Republic, it's because this is the place that I was born in. And so there were a lot of people that I'm mentioning here and others that, like I said, I'm to mention, but I didn't know much about them. And so I went ahead and I started studying about them to learn more about them. Because as it is said, those that lose their history die. And so I really don't want our African descendants, brothers and sisters, to lose their history, because otherwise that means that they did not exist. And so to me, they do exist. And therefore, I feel that we need to learn more about them so that their history is not forgotten. The only history that we hear about and we always learn about the Africans and the people of the African descents, about the capture, the 500 years of slavery, etc. Although this is important, we rarely know the history of those Africans and African descendants who resisted and who changed and continue to change history. We give thanks to the African American Mumia Abu Jamal, a very important political figure and political prisoner sentenced to death, for making an analysis of Black August, which included events from history that go back a long time and deal with revolutionary changes with the African descendants in the United States. And so, like I said, we're also adding and contributing by including the Africans and the African descendants in the Latin America diaspora, whose oppression and white supremacy resistance have changed and continue to change history. Now, let me go back a little bit, in case some of you don't know. Black August, it's a movement that originated in the 70s. It originated because they killed 3 brothers. They were called the Soledad brothers in the Soledad prison in California. And so the first Black August was celebrated in 1979. A group of prisoners that were within the Friends, just to remember them because of what they did, because they were resisting oppression. And so when you resist oppression, usually you fall in the system, and the fall is not that well taken. So we are remembering them as well, to know that we remember them and that they are not forgotten. So Black August in the diaspora, with this presentation and with this information, we're saying what is hidden comes out to never be hidden again. So the stories and the people that we talk about that we don't hear about and we haven't heard about, we're bringing them out so that their story cannot be hidden. Like Ubuntu says, we are because they were, and because they were, we are. And so with that meaning of Ubuntu, we want to always remember that we're here, how we are here today with the liberties to meet and speak and do certain things. It's because of them. And so they should never be forgotten. And like I said previously, we don't want the story to die. So the first one that we're going to be learning about is Sebastian Lemba. Now, I was very impressed with his story because I had to really go back and see what the story was really about. And so he was born in December 24, 1520 in Africa. And then he was captured and he was brought here to the island. Now we have to understand that back in those days, there was no Haiti and there was no Dominican Republic. There was only La Hispaniola. That's what they used to call them because we were colonized by Spaniards. And so he did not accept the treatment that the Spaniards were giving to him and the rest of his people. And so he goes up around the year 1532. So as you can see, it wasn't even that long. And he went into the mountains. For 15 years, he fought the Spanish authorities. So a lot of slaves also joined his group. And so what they used to do was go around in the country or in the island and causing havoc with the Spaniards. And so they went in, they liberated the slaves that they had, and then those slaves went with them. And so he obviously, he led his men, he organized them as if it was like a real army. And they went to some of the places that they went. In that time, they were called palenques. Now, the palenques were the areas where the plantation owners were raising sugarcane. So that's where they kept the slaves, and they were called palenques. And so it was Higüey, Asua, Bauruco, San Juan de la Maguana, Puerto Plata, and Sable. He was captured and when he was 27 years old, and his death was either between 1547 or 1548. So as you can see here, the map on the right, where you see the little colors there, you can see that more or less they went all over the island. So those were the areas that they were going, and that went and to the palenques of those areas and liberated the slave. Now, probably you don't know the distance, but in a car today, like from Puerto Plata, which is this area here, from over here to this area to the east, which is Higüey and Sable. So here is Higüey and here's the Sable. So it's like about a 7-8 hours drive. So give or take, if you're going walking, that's going to take some days. And so just so that we can have an idea of what they had to go through during those days. And imagine coming from Africa and having to go around places that they didn't know. So most likely they had to do a lot of networking, like we call today networking, in order for them to be able to know the island. So I'm very grateful for what he did during that time, because that meant that they continued to resist oppression. And so that left us with what we have today. Now, I'm going to talk about Gaspar Yanga. Now, Gaspar Yanga was one of those slaves that he was brought also from Africa, and he was forced into working also in the sugar plantations in Mexico. And so the most successful rebellion in the America during the 16th century. So that's, I think that's worthy of not only just knowing, but also remembering. Imagine during that time, probably with basically some machetes, or I'm pretty sure they some things, some sticks like we see there, Yanga, to be able to fight, while the Spaniards and the criollos were more equipped. Now, they escaped, and for almost 60 years, they eluded the capture of from the Spaniards and the criollos. They established a community high in the mountains that also, during that time, some of you might know, but that's what they call los cimarrones in Spanish, or the maroons in English. And so that's what they called the slaves that escaped, and they went up into the mountains. That's how they used to call them. And so, sure enough, also the natives from Mexico were also, and let alone also in the island of Hispaniola with Lemba, also they also joined them. The few that remain, they also joined them in the mountains as well. The mountains here in the Dominican Republic, or the island of Hispaniola, which was called then, it's called now the area of the Pico Duarte. That is the highest peak in the Caribbean. And so that's where they hit, in that area. So did the Yanga and his people. They also went into the mountains and they hid there. And so what they used to do was, we remember that the story, they tell us a story today about Robin Hood. So we can see that it wasn't just, a story or something that was made up. No, it was something that went on at a certain time, because what Lemba and his people did was that every time a caravan from the Spaniards and the criollos used to pass by, they used to ambush the caravans, and they used to take the goods that they were carrying, and they used to, fight with the Spaniards. And so it came a point where the Spaniards were, they were just tired, and they couldn't beat them. And so no matter what Yanga and his people tried to do, they tried to establish peace, but the Spaniards didn't go for it. Until finally they saw that, it's been over so many years and we haven't been able to do anything with them. We haven't been able to win this war. And so sure enough, they had to come into a peace agreement with Yanga and his people. Now, the peace agreement that they were able to establish was that if Yanga and his people did not attack those caravans anymore, because it was causing economical issues with the Spaniards and the criollos. I mean, they were ruining their business. And so, just like today, they don't want their business to be ruined. And so Yanga said, well, you have to give us land, you have to give us our freedom, and you have to recognize that we're free, etc. And so that was the peace agreement that they came up with. So the Spaniards did recognize them, and they gave them the land, the area. As you can see here, the area is called Veracruz, the entire area of Veracruz, as we see up here in on the top right-hand side. This is the area here in Mexico. And then on the bottom one, we can see more or less where the land of what is called today, again, Yanga. Then it was given the name San Lorenzo de los Negros. So, and it's funny because once they reached that agreement and they did all that, later on, as we see in the 17th century, what did they do? They changed the name of the San Lorenzo de los Negros, and then they gave it the name of a Spanish colonial priest. So it was like, okay, so what happened to Yanga and his people? Why are you going back to the colonial people, especially a priest? So it was only until 1932 that it was renamed after Gaspar Yanga. So once again, it was called Yanga. So that's why it's important for us, and we're going to see throughout this presentation how important it is for us to be able to remember the story, to tell the story. And not only that, to always remember the names of the places, because it has a very important definition. It's something that's very important for us to be able to claim our history. Because if it's named like San Lorenzo de Cerralbo, who was San Lorenzo de Cerralbo? What did he have to do when he wasn't even there in the 1500s? You see? So this is why our stories will die if we don't continue to tell our stories. Because if we don't tell our stories, nobody else is going to tell our stories. So the next one, it's going to be Gregorio Luperon. Now, he was a mulatto. Mulatto means that he was, his father was Caucasian or white, and his mother was African descendant. So his mother, it is said, that was born in the British Islands, which was further east here in the Caribbean. And so she spoke English, but she came here, or they brought her here. That's not very clear how that happened, but she was here. And so his father was a Spanish middle-class man, Caucasian or white, who did not accept him as his son or any, he did not approve that he was his son. And so that wasn't done back then. As a matter of fact, it was against the law. It was against the law until probably the late 50s, the early 60s. So you can see what was going on in that time. So a lot of things were happening. And so our people went through a lot to be able to give us the opportunities that we have today. So Gregorio Luperon, you have to understand what was going on in that area in Latin America. It wasn't only here in the island of La Hispaniola. It was also going on in Latin America. Now, as we know a little bit about the island, we know that in 1804, Haiti gained its independence from Spain. So the island was colonized by Spain, France, and England. So we had those three countries that came to colonize the island back in those days. But there was a lot of conflict amongst the people here, because you had the colonists or the settlers, and you had the African descendants, you had the Africans, and you had the criollos. Now, one particular thing that happened with the island here that probably most of you know, okay, happened to the Taínos, who were the natives from here. Well, they were extinct because they died. They killed all of them. And one of the stories says that that a lot of the mothers, once they realized what was happening, they drowned their babies in the rivers. And so that's why their descendants was very few. And so what happened to them was that when they went into the mountains with the African slaves and the descendants, they mixed. And so that mixture is what's still left here today in the island of La Hispaniola. Now, you might have some people that say, well, I'm Taino because of my skin and I look like a, I'm not saying this word in a bad sense, but they used to call them Indio. And so for lack of better words, I don't think we have that those words except the Taino. But anyways, they also mix with the Spaniards. So you have two kinds of Taino mixture. And so you have the criollos. Now, who were the criollos? The criollos were the sons and daughters of those mixtures. And so those that were leaned more to their Spaniards lineage, that's what they did. That's what they called the criollos, because they approved the colonization. They approved being linked with the Spaniards. Okay, so in the 1800s, when it became Haiti, obtained its independence, it was mostly African descendants and Africans that were dominant. And so the criollos didn't want to be governed by the Africans or the African descendants. And so there was always conflict between these people back then, and it still lingered today because those issues were never resolved. And so Gregorio, he was poor because he was raised by his mother. He spoke English as his first language, and of course, in Spanish also was spoken here. He also learned, speak Spanish. But when he was 14 years old, he also learned how to speak French. And the reason why he learned how to speak French was so that he was able to read the French marketing books, because he was an entrepreneur in marketing. He was selling, candies, everything that they could make and his mother could make, he would sell in order to sustain his family. And so at a young age, he was very well independent. By the age of 18, he was already interested in going out and against the oppression. And so when he was 22, the president of that time in 1863, around that area, they wanted to go back and link with the Spaniards. They didn't want to be independent. So this caused a lot of controversy with Gregorio Luperon. By the way, his name was Duperon, which was his mother's name, Duperon. And he changed it to Luperon because he felt that he was more connected with the Spanish side of so he changed it to Luperon. And so he was totally against it. And so he became a fighter. He joined the military. In other words, he rebelled, not the military, because there was a lot of things going on then, but obviously because of what he demonstrated, he was given the highest rank in that revolution, because they did armed and caused a revolution, and he was the leader of that revolution. And so the revolution was called the Restoration War. So they did go to war between those that did not want to be again going back to Spain, or to be governed by Spain, with those that did want to be governed by Spain. And so they won the war. And so till today, he is remembered as the fourth father of the homeland of the Dominican Republic, because by that time, the Dominican Republic had also independent itself from Spain. And so they once again were restored to the Dominican Republic. And so he became the 28th president. And there's also a high school named after him in the city of New York. So I was really excited. And also when that happened. So that happened in 1992. Just in case you didn't know who he was, so now you know a little bit of who he was. And so as you can see here, those were the dynamics that were going on in the island. And so now you have, if you see here in the map on the right-hand side on the bottom, that you see Santo Domingo. Now, Saint-Domingue was also another name given to the entire island back in those days, so that you can understand also why you hear the name Saint-Domingue. So the name Saint-Domingue was also the name that was given to the island. So Santo Domingo, as you can see, that's where the people that wanted to be linked with the Spaniards were located. And Gregorio Luperon was located all the way up in the north where Puerto Plata is. So that you can understand more or less. So the south, so you had the south and you had the north. So the south, they were more into linking with the Spaniards, and the north, they didn't want to be linked. So those were the dynamics. A lot of things were going on at that time. And so now you can understand still some of those things are going on between trying to find identity in the Dominican people. It's because there's a lot of conflict that originated back then, and the racism that also, birthed out of those time as well. So the other entity the other person that we're going to be learning about is Maria Remedios del Valle. Now, I was really fascinated with her because, and I also want to mention, because there's not that many female out there that we can hear about, the things that they did. I mean, we have one here. Her name is Anacaona. And she was quite a rebel, and they had she gave them to the Spaniards. I mean, she gave them a lot of havoc when they came in. So she was a cacique, and so we know her, but African descendants, there's not that many African descendants that we can, and that's why I'm more encouraging you to also look up females that did, African descendants that did rebel against oppression and left a mark, because we don't hear their stories. As a matter of fact, we're going to hear with Maria Remedios del Valle what happened to her. And her story was almost erased. And so, which is something sad, but she was born in Buenos Aires in 1766. She was an African descendant, and she was given the rank of captain. Her husband and her sons, they fought in the Argentinian Revolution of Independence. And there's something that we also have to understand here. Back in those days, you had civilians that would join the people that were fighting, or the army, or they would follow them, even though they didn't belong in the army. They would follow them, just because they were also interested in their liberation. And so they did this all over Latin America. So she was one of them, and so was her family. She was captured during that time. She was captured, she was wounded, all that, and she still escaped. She also tended to the injured soldiers, even though they didn't let her, because she was a woman, and there was a general that didn't allow it, but then there was another one that did allow her to also assist on those that were wounded. And so she also did that. And so the thing that really struck me was that after all she did, she was found begging on the streets of Buenos Aires. And that to me really got my heart. Not only that, she was also a victim of the implacable enemy bureaucracy that they had back in those days, because everybody, all the Caucasians that, and I'm pretty sure criollos that fought in the war, they got their recompense. In other words, they were remunerated for what they did, and they received a pension. Now, here's an African descendant woman who lost her sons, her family in the wars. There were, I mean, it was two wars. They fought the British, and they also fought the Virreinato from Peru, which was also the Spanish kingdom or colonizers. So everybody was getting their pension, and then there's this woman that wasn't getting anything, so she had to go out and beg. And so Juan Jose Viamonte found her begging, and so they tried to do everything they could so that they would give her pension. And so they, the same as today, they run around and they never gave her anything until finally, her last days, they did manage to give her something, and they didn't even give it to her like monthly. They gave it to her like every other day or every other month or twice or three times a year. So anyway, she went through that as well. So we see here, like I was saying, the Viceroyalty of La Plata. So you see, all the way from up north, in La Paz, Bolivia, all that. So they kind of like were fighting with the Spanish. They were fighting with the British as well. So, and then that's when, they became, Argentina became liberated as the country of Argentina. Now, the other reason why I wanted to share her story is because, let alone we don't know her story, we haven't heard her story. Today, there's a lot of racism going on. And one of the countries that stands out the most in Latin America for a long time, for many years, has been Argentina. And so they did name her Mother of the Homeland in 2022. So they at least recognize her, even though it was so many years, more than 100 years later, but they did recognize her. And they they had a statue made for her. And during these times, her statue was vandalized and they burned it. So, at least let's hear her story. Let's hear our stories so that these stories don't die. And we know what is happening, because that's the only way we can at least stop some of the things that are happening with us and some of our brothers and sisters that are African descendants today. So now we're going to go to the continent of Africa. So in the continent of Africa, we have the Zulu Kingdom. So what happened to the Zulu Kingdom? And we see the Zulu, where the Zulu land on the bottom map down there in the orange block. That was the Zulu land. And so the Zulu land, what they were doing was the British wanted that land. Why? Because they wanted the land. Not only did they want the land, they wanted the Africans as slaves to work on the diamond mines. So imagine, not only they were already colonizing, but they still want them to be working and do the work of the mines. So they were pretty interested in the land, and so they waged war to the Zulus. And so Lieutenant General Lord Chelmsford said, "If I am called upon to conduct operations against the Zulus, I shall show them how hopelessly inferior they are, to us in the fighting power, although numerically stronger. In other words, the Zulu were much, much more people than the British. But the British, with their superiority, they said that they were, and that they had the fighting power. However, the Zulus, taught them wrong. In some of the battles, they began to battle them, and they won. They won a lot of battles against the British. Unfortunately, towards the end, they spent a lot of time in many years in the fight. The British won, but they won because they began to have the arms. In other words, the gunpowder, the guns and the rifles. The Zulus, if they did get later on, they got, old rifles that didn't work properly. And besides, they didn't know how to use them. They didn't have time to use them, etc. So as you can see, no matter what, we have always rebelled. Our African ancestors, they have resisted. And this is what Black August is about resisting oppression, resisting those that want to continue to oppress us. And so they bravely won like I said, one of the wars, to the point where the British were embarrassed. And in order for them to be able to save their face internationally, I mean, they had to go in back with all their might to be able to win the battle against the Zulus. And like I said, eventually they did win the war. And so again, the British conquered and colonized the Zulus in the Zulu Kingdom. Now, these are some of the rebels that rebelled, that were called the Mau Mau, we're gonna be seeing now. So the Mau Mau were the different tribes in the area of Kenya that we see there on the bottom map in Africa, in the little red little square again, which is Kenya. And so you had different tribes, and they were the Masi tribe, they were the Kamba, the Embu, the Meru, and the one on the bottom, the Kikuyu tribes. Now, all these tribes, they got together and they formed what was called later, even though they themselves did not call themselves Mau, but that's what they were, the name that they were called by. And so that's the name that became famous, the Mau Mau. So the Mau Mau also rebelled against the oppression, against the colonialism, against what they were doing to them as a people in Africa at that time by the British. And so they rebelled, and it was kind of like a war of divide and conquer, because what the British did, they got one of the tribes. Actually, if we see down here, the Kikuyu were the ones that kind of like united with the British. And so today, there's more of them than any of the other tribes, because they united with the British. And so the British kind of like had, at the end, they kind of like protected them. But nevertheless, they fought, and also they fought for many years, actually about 10 years, until from 1952 to 1960. And so in 1963 was when Kenya gained its independence, because of the Mau Mau and the people. They were already trying to they weren't having it anymore. And so even though, as we see today, what's happening in Africa It's the same thing that happened in Latin America. The colonizers have never left. Although we think they did, and we think we are free, our minds are not free because they are still colonized. So in Africa, it's the same situation. And not only that, who are the ones that are in power? Like I always say, well, just look, is it an African descendant that's in power? Who are the people that are in control of the commercial and commerce? So we have to look at all those things so that we can see where we are today. And this is why I continue to say it's important for us to be able to remember our ancestors that fought, especially African descendant ancestors who fought for us to be able to be where we are today. So we see that, like the Mau Mau and like the rebellions that were going on all through Latin America and the United States, we believe that in this Black August, that's why we felt here at Ubuntu El Retorno, we felt that we had to share not only the oppression and the rebellion or the resistance that went on in the United States, but also in Latin America and in Africa as well.